Hey, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Ctrl+Alt+Deploy. I am CEO of TestSavant, Alex Belotsky, and joined by my co-host, Kuba Fietkiewicz.
Hey, good to be here.
So we basically, our first episode, we decided to let the audience get familiar with us, get to know what this is all about, what we're talking about, and why we're talking about it. And the thing that's on my mind right now is, Kuba, you're a very experienced CTO in enterprise high stakes deployments, and curious what you think right now with the innovations with AI. How does that change things for you? How does an LLM being introduced in pretty much in many applications? How does the traditional software development lifecycle change from your perspective?
Yeah, I think what it does is it extends the life cycle a little bit, where the traditional fundamental assumption of determinism as a function of software reliability no longer applies. And so traditionally, if you have normally inputs match outputs, and if you have a specific input A, that it will turn into output B. And if it doesn't, then that's a bug. With Gen AI these days, the inputs may not match the outputs every time. A will result in probably B, maybe B minus, occasionally C. And so in testing, our existing pipelines really don't work with this uncertainty. They're designed for binary states. And so in order to accommodate these new probabilistic outcomes, we need to add an additional step, an evaluation stage, basically, in the pipeline. We want to measure the quality of the output rather than just checking for particular states. That's a really big departure from traditional thinking, in my opinion.
Let's see. Well, LLM is one thing, and traditional chatbot is one thing, but right now everybody's rushing to build and deploy agentic applications. That's like the biggest trend right now in 2026. And, agents are not just back and forth chatbots. They have tools that they can take action, and in some way that more and more becoming autonomous. So they're able to write and execute their own code. So from your perspective, what should the CTO be approaching right now to secure agents in production? I should say assuring quality of these agents in production.
Well, yeah, I mean, security is now part of assurance. But if you kind of step back and you look at both types of systems as black boxes, then you can theoretically test agentic and non-agentic in the same way, right? But if you use the black box approach, but obviously the security risk surface area within, the agentic black box is a lot bigger. So a chatbot might give you bad advice and might cause some reputational damage, whereas an agent might delete a database. And so we've already seen that a few months ago. And that was a big kerfuffle. And so securing agents, I think, requires opening up that black box a little bit and moving the security controls closer to the infrastructure. So in a RAG workflow, you might rely on prompt engineering, tell the bot, don't do bad things, or make sure you do the good things. With Agentic, you need more rigid permission scoping at the architectural level. So tools like if you're calling an API or Jira or whatever SQL database, then you got to wrap that with restrictions on the tool calls and just allow the absolute minimum of actions for that task.
I see. Yeah, and I also hear that it's important to limit the amount of time the permissions are given to any of these agents. Whatever permissions are allocated for a particular task, you got to like strip them immediately off of after that task has been completed, because it's like these agents are like kind of employees, right? In essence, kind of like people in the company.
Yeah, yeah. So whereas before you couldn't trust outside people, you couldn't trust your employees. Now you can't trust both of those and your agents
Yeah,
either.
yeah, yeah. And it's a whole new ball game now.
So Alex, what's your perspective on testing? You know, we're now adding this evaluation stage into our pipelines. Do you think adding this will affect deployment velocity? So what I mean by that is, in this evaluation stage, how do you implement regression testing that's reliable in whatever the definition of reliable is now, right? Whatever the boundary conditions are, and but in a way that doesn't slow down releases due to like over testing, because you got to test everything, or do you?
Yeah. Uh, no, that's it definitely creates a challenge because traditionally you have a requirement. The QA team breaks down the requirement into, in the test plans, test cases, and then go through that one by one. Now you have to run a set of prompts, and you have to run how many prompts is there? I mean, the number itself is somewhat meaningless because of what impact does each of these prompts have. So you can't really manually cover everything, and it's very difficult to create automated test cases when it comes to Gen AI, because how deep do you go? How many do you use? What's the cost behind each of your cases? And especially if you're using now LLMs to generate them, every time you run a script to generate test cases, they're going to be different. So regression then becomes a serious problem. You need a system that allows the tester to be able to create very focused set of prompts that relies on knowing what the application actually does, meaning like what components make up the application, what components are part of the agentic system, what tools are they using, what are they connecting to, and then have prompts generated specifically to test out various direct, indirect injections, various like exfiltration techniques, and have that data set of those test cases be able to run over and over again every time the application changes in some way. So it creates a new set of challenges. From a manual perspective, it becomes very difficult to run what in essence could be thousands of prompts. And then from an automated side, it's difficult to recreate the same exact prompt. So you need tools that are doing that for you.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, I mean, man, there's a lot to unpack there. There's how much you test, and then there's like the skill sets and the tools of the people.
Yeah.
So, and let's go down that thread. You know, this is a whole new skill set than, just traditional Selenium scripting. Um, do we need to replace QA with data scientists now?
Yeah, great question. You traditionally, taking a step back, traditionally QA and I'd say even app dev doesn't really concern with themselves too much with security. Certainly not when it comes to red teaming LLM, red teaming agentic systems. They're not really neck deep into what is the current risk factors associated with them. So QA doesn't really right now. It's not fully equipped to really handle this new set of applications. So they have to expand. They certainly have to now go into red teaming and understand what red teaming of AI applications really means. And I think app dev has to be aware of making sure that these applications, as they're developing them, are fitted within a compliance framework that the company is most concerned about. So it's a really is a new set of challenges. I don't think you're replacing the QA with ML. It's that it has to be, I think, a cross-departmental type of effort. So you have to work together much more than before. You have to have the risk department really be aware of what is the most important thing for the company to be complying with. You have to have like the CIO, CISO be able to understand the security nature and what has to be secured with these new applications. And then AI has to understand, I mean, QA has to understand the under the engine, like the under the hood engine that's now powering these applications, how it's non-deterministic. The traditional requirement A to B kind of mapping no longer works. And it's now everybody has to, I think, develop some new set of skills. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's still QA that is the final gate, and development, app dev, and the CTO are still the ones that are the most responsible because they're deploying this to production.
Yeah. Well, QA has the domain expertise in whatever the app is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so honestly, they still need to verify whether it's secure or whether it's compliant or all of the things, right? At the end of the day, they're the ones who get blamed or not blamed
Hmm.
for passing through
Yeah.
reliable or not reliable software.
Yeah, I think they also have to learn right now and focus more, not necessarily on what it's supposed to do, which is what you would think is the traditional approach, but really understand what it shouldn't do and heavily test for that because we have such a thing as like hallucinations and drift in LLMs and AI applications. So it's not that hard, even with some of the latest the LLM deployments, like with Chat GPT 5.2, Gemini. It's not that difficult to cause the drift away from the desired functionality. So they do have to understand how to make sure that it's still staying well within the bounds of what it shouldn't be doing and making sure that it doesn't. And you're right, it's the last deployment. It's the last stage before deployment.
So like talking about those bounds, like in like say you're testing different types of apps, like you got your marketing chatbot, or you've got your healthcare thing, or you've got an agent. Like, how do you determine what to test based on the actual use case?
You have to know what the application is made of. So not uh, again, we're talking about there's the user experience, the UI of the application, but then right now, more and more, the brain of it is this non-deterministic engine, the LLM. So everything that gets added, whether it's a RAG database, some kind of tool call, it expands the what's called the bill of material for that application. So it's an additional component gets plugged in and it creates a wider and wider attack surface. So it's very important for QA to understand what components make up this new application and be able to simulate the inputs that are coming from these additional tools, RAG databases, document ingestions. So they need to be able to understand what components make it up that application and how to be able to simulate the inputs and be able to track and make sure that the outputs are staying within bounds of their expectations and then have an ability to regress those same exact tests and those same exact prompts every time that there's any kind of a change that comes down the pipeline from development.
It sounds to me like the tooling has to adapt in the same way that the QA department does.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. And the tooling is becoming probably the most important thing because of how limited and slow manual testing and manual confirmation is becoming when it comes to AI based applications, where typically QA is already time bound and oftentimes, uh,
Right at the very end of a deployment cycle.
yeah. And even if they're given 2 weeks, oftentimes development takes a little bit longer and finalizing, the last bug. So if
The
that was
deadline doesn't move, right?
No, no. And so if it was 2 weeks from the planning, in reality, it could be a week. So manual testing becomes really difficult because how many prompts, how do you run through that regression case that could, in essence, be into the thousands of prompts, new additional tools, new additional changes to the database, changes to the RAG database, all of that affects the test plan. So tooling is becoming really, really important. And you're absolutely right. It's got to adapt. The tool has to understand what makes up that application and focus on the things that are most critical and probably like the most susceptible to damage out into production and really dive deep into those sections as opposed to waste time and money because now with LLMs there's a token count, right? There's an actual cost to running each of these injections, each of these prompts. Any interaction with the application costs money. There's even a thing called denial of wallet attack out there where attackers can just basically like spam your model, spam your application for nonsensical output, and that'll just drain your wallet and hit some threshold and the application is now dead in the water. So yeah, tooling I think is the most important thing besides them understanding how the tool works, how the tool must be set up and configured in order to really test the things that are most important to that specific application, to that department. and then to that company.
In terms of costs, I've been toying around with organizing my thoughts around metrics around tracking economic health and functional health of these
Uh-huh.
apps.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really fully defined that yet in terms of our own implementation, but for example, say we track cost per successful transaction. So instead of just saying, okay, this is our total AI spend, I want to know how much it costs to answer a question satisfactorily or reliably.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if that spend is flat, but the satisfaction rate is dropping, then the cost per value is out of whack. And so you can bring that back to red teaming, right? Where economic health is pretty easy to implement. Did the quality of the test execution change over time? And did that
Mm-hmm.
cost change?
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of functional health, say we track human intervention rate. So in a copilot or an agent, how often do we have to reject the suggestion or rewrite it completely? And if that number is creeping up, then it's likely that there's model drift or, the prompts aren't maintaining their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And, you want to track this stuff in your tooling to kind of front run users stopping trusting your feature. Um, right.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because like the strongest guardrail is basically going to deny pretty much everything, and any kind of interaction with your application is just going to be put to a stop, because the strongest setting, or the biggest, like the thickest gate on your AI app is going to stop everything. And so there's this metric, which is benign rejection rate, which has to come into play. You really have to understand how, and this is where it comes to guardrails, and it your system, your tooling has to really understand what is a legitimate request, what is a legitimate output, versus what should be, in a sense, blocked or protected by default. And this brings up a good, or a thought in my head, like that testing itself is standalone, is good to know where you're at, but that testing has to really feed the guardrailing and the security element of the application. And that guardrail has to also be very adaptive, because based on your test results, you need to be able to adjust the guardrail, because static guardrails right now are very easy to bypass by a sophisticated attacker. So the system has to be clever enough to understand where the vulnerabilities are after testing, be able to feed that knowledge into the guardrails. The guardrails have to be adapted and redeployed, and all of that has to stay within a compliance and governance framework that the company has. So a sophisticated tool has to be able to do all three of those, and do all three of those things well. And that is, again, that is part of now more and more of the responsibility for the actual development department, for the CTO, as the last stage before it gets pushed into the deep part of the ocean, right out there, where it's susceptible to an ever evolving and ever more advanced set of attackers who could potentially take advantage of all this.
I think the way that we can probably sum up we like AI reliability is bounded behavior. Like, is the model staying within allowed outputs, right? And that's, tested with red teaming or whatever guardrails. And then predictable failure, and then measuring that kind of performance uh, of your AI app. Then there's like the graceful degradation. What happens when it fails?
Hmm.
And then wrapping it up with auditability and traceability, right? That when you go back and you see that failure, where, which model was it? What was the query? Who did it? What permissions do they have?
Hmm.
And how all of that changes over time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
this
traceability is key.
this almost brings me back to my graduate studies, where it's closer to like how we reason about distributed systems
Hmm.
and how they're, so failure prone, and you have to like, it's basically probably reliable rather than always reliable.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to, as with quality assurance in general, there is no 100% of that your application is basically 100% functional across every potential functionality. There's a certain percentage of expected quality that you can reach. There is this rule that I over my career has always heard is like the 80-20 rule, where you cover and you try to test for 80% of the most important, like you look for the most important, most critical functionality in the application. You test for that, and the remaining 20 is this out of boundary kind of edge case where they're probably still out there, but how much time and how much effort and how much cost are you putting into looking for this additional 20? So it really, with AI applications, it's absolutely, the metric is how sure are you about the 80% of the most important things that it shouldn't be doing, and then of course there's still some kind of a percentage, some factor that is left over where it's non-traceable. So that's why we see a lot right now in the industry, people talking about securing AI, and so it's not so much about securing, it's offering assurance that the most important things and the most critical elements of your application are functioning as you expect and are doing so over a very large set of probabilities, so large amount of interactions or large amount of permutations, and the rest you have to basically have a system that is able to adapt immediately as new things are discovered.
Well, that's the thing. The goalposts are never in the same spot.
Never. Yeah.
Tomorrow, it's going to be a completely different everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your system has to adapt, or you have to at least keep track of how it's changing.
You have to keep track, and you have to be able to understand how quickly you can mitigate these risks, and this just keeps falling back and back onto the shoulders of what I think is app dev, the CTO, because all companies have that, or the vast majority. They'll have the application development, they'll have the QA. They might not, and oftentimes do not, have the ML expertise, the AI security expertise in place, and that persona, that skill set is getting harder and harder to find. So you can't just not do it. And especially with CEOs and boards wanting to take advantage of all the amazing AI functionalities, they want to be able to increase their ROI, increase their productivity. So they want this out there in production, and they want it now. They want it yesterday. So, and they don't have time to wait for a robust team of ML engineers and focused risk and security engineers around AI. They have to be able to provide the necessary skills and tools to the existing department, to the CTO, to the app dev, to QA, in order to proceed forward.
Yeah, we've seen some different organization structures, like in the bigger enterprises. Yeah, there's like shared services that have all these skill sets, and they define what the tooling should be and what the process should be from the top down. Of course, I've been in these kind of organizations, and you always rail against that, and you want to have your own tooling. But then you bring up the point of, like, there's that skill set. If you're not a huge enterprise, I mean, good luck hiring these people.
Yeah.
They don't exist yet and in sufficient quantities. And so you either outsource it to tooling, or you outsource it to maybe like a QA organization that has learned this kind of tooling and can help you with that. It's a strange new world. What we know is there's just not enough people to help chase the goalposts.
Right. Right. And a good point about, the difference in smaller businesses and larger enterprise. I think in both cases, the platform is very important. So in cases where they're a smaller company and they don't have the talent necessary to define the risk, to then make sure that it's tested and secured, and then it's deployed. So you need a central platform that assists the existing teams in order to be able to do that professionally and to do that right. And then at enterprise level, well, each of those departments, they use their own tooling. Risk has their kind of, their governance applications, where it's just an enormous checklist of things. Then you have AI red teaming with all kinds of different tools out there that will generate scripts, generate prompts, And then the guardrails, right? That's another thing. So you need like one central place, one central platform for all of them to put together, put their knowledge and talent into play, and be able to really see the entire like situational awareness of the whole entire picture of what are the applications out there, where are they being deployed, what are these applications consisting of, their bill of material, how are these applications tested, have they been tested in a compliant way, are the guardrails updated now based on the test results, and all of that transparent down to the metadata that comes along with each of the inputs and outputs that goes to the LLM. So, observability across that whole entire spectrum of use cases becomes really important for the companies that have the talent and the companies that don't. One central place is where it's all going to end up anyway, in order to reduce the risk as much as possible. And as I said, assure everybody that what they're deploying is doing what it's supposed to do, and then doing it in a secure way.
Yeah. I really want to hear from others how everyone else is working on these problems.
Yeah, and that's what we're here for. So I think in the next few episodes, we're going to discover more and more about how exactly experts at deployment are handling these challenges today in all kinds of environments at every stage of the life cycle.
So if you're listening and you're in the trenches doing this with the rest of us, attempting to deploy reliable AI, let's talk. And on that note,
It's Control Alt Deploy.
this is Control Alt Deploy.
Let's ship it.